Hello guys, welcome to the channel. This is the story about what if Naruto was the Jinchuuriki of 9 Bijuu x Highschool DXD Part 9. Before I start the video, please subscribe the channel for more fanfiction video and please share this video with your friends. This story was written by Havoc Tear. With any more interception, let's start the video. Kyoto Mountain Shrine. Kuroka sat up and found herself looking down at the blood covering her claws in bewilderment. Though she was snapped out of it by Naruto's voice. "Get off, Kuroka." She hopped off, and revealed beneath the slash's shirt was a set of claw marks barely drawing blood across his stomach as he sat up. Naruto sighed, and grumbled. "I don't have many of these damn shirts." Though internally, he speaks to his tenants. "Thank you for not healing this, Kurama. Last thing we need is them to know of your regeneration powers." The fox huffed but offered nothing beyond that. Kuroka beamed, pointing at the marks and claiming, "I got a hit on you." Naruto scoffed but did not reply as he lifted his right hand, that glowed a familiar-looking light green that surprised the devils, especially a particular nun, and placed it above the wound. Slowly the wound stitched itself back together. Everyone watched as within moments, the wound was gone as if never there and the glow faded. Getting back on his feet, Naruto looked to the Nekosho and was about to say something, but he sensed a rapidly approaching missile and immediately launched into a backflip over a certain seraphim and landed in a crouch, with the grace of the cat he was still imitating. He heard the "oof" of someone hitting the ground, as it seems that Kuroka's cat-like instincts saved her too, and the Archangel Gabriel was rubbing her head as she sat on the grass. Clearly, she had attempted to tackle Naruto and had missed both him and Kuroka. Sighing, he asks, "What was that? Gabriel-san, right?" Hopping back up, as if nothing happened, the prettiest woman in heaven spun on her feet to face the sage while clapping daintily and almost squealing. Naruto just stared at her deadpan, but thankfully, Gabriel explained. Your hands of healing." Still stumped, the sage lifts his hand again and flowed the basic mystical palm technique once more, the only Iryojutsu he can do without hand signs, and it only barely works on light scratches, and still requires all of his chakra control to manage that. Anything beyond that requires a chain of signs and focus for him to pull off. Even the medical scalpel, which most medical ninjas can do without much thought or effort. Gabriel nodded frantically, moving in quickly to inspect it, and naturally everyone else does too, with Asia at the head. Kaneko was the first to speak, stating firmly, "Chakra." Naruto nodded simply. Kuroka added, "Much denser and different from mine." She frowned deeper the longer she looked at it, and the sage nodded again, stating, "I noticed that too. Yours seems." Naruto thought on how to say this as nicely as possible, but upon the snort of foxy origin within his head, he ended up just blurted out, "Less developed, incomplete." Both catgirls grew a tick mark for different reasons. Kaneko, as many have commented how underdeveloped she was for her age, even more so when compared to her older sister, who is an arrow cat. Kuroka was annoyed as she was proud of her chakra mastery, and here comes this super-powered sage stating her chakra is underdeveloped. From her perspective, him and his kin are all the weird ones here. Gabriel, however, was more interested in the soft green glow, and when she touched it, she and Naruto seemed to be teleported into a golden space with flowing light and fluffy clouds. Blinking, Naruto looked around and muttered, "My soulscape? No. This isn't mine." Finding his hand still grasped by an equally confused Seraphim Gabriel, he whispered, "This is yours." Gabriel snapped to him, confused, and tilted her head with all the innocence the world could contain as she asks, "You know where we are?" Naruto nodded, saying, "We are in your soulscape." Gabriel's soulscape. Blinking owlishly, Gabriel, confused by the terminology, asks, "Soulscape?" Naruto nodded before looking around the seemingly endless space as he explained. "A physical representative manifestation of one's own soul, where one's deepest truth can be found. Though, I am unsure why I am here in your soul." Gaining a sense of understanding, the Archangel looks around at this pure space and was in wonder. Why did she appear here? As if responding to her thoughts, the very familiar visage of her home began to appear all around them. The several levels of heaven, during the early days of their father's reign, appeared along with her early days, and the love overflowing flooded the angel, though Naruto was more than a little uncomfortable at the sight. The sight of the growing legions of pure white wings angels were a sight for the former shinobi. It almost brought Gabriel to tears as they even spotted the form of the pure angel form of one fallen governor, and a certain 10-winged fallen back in the garden, among the flocks of these groups. Then things seemed to leap forward. The number of angels had notably shrunken, with several key members spotted before now missing, and the light and love not as potent as before. Yet despite that, they spotted a familiar 12-winged woman looking just the same and still with her innocence, flowing with love for all, even for those who had departed the light of her father and creator. Without warning, things shifted again, and Naruto watched as the three factions clashed on a battleground of unknown territory. The battle was brutal, bloody, but most importantly, costly. Again, they watched as the Gabriel of this time striking out with tears on her eyes as she fought against those left the grace of their father's light. Shifting back, Naruto took note that they had returned to the heavens again, but again the light had dimmed more than last time but remained centered around Gabriel and her brother Michael. The archangel was weeping on the now empty throne, her brother manning a device attempting to keep things going. More and more angels loosing their halos, their wings darkened by sin and being forced out. It shifted again, and now they witnessed the staleness of the heavens, the strict discipline maintained and the seeming heavy-handed measures of Michael to keep things together. It was clear he was struggling. Naruto could see that much, and his heart went out to him, but some of his decrees did not sit right with the sage. As time went on, they saw as Gabriel finally returned to spreading her innocence and care to those who need it the most. Yet even Naruto could tell it was barely the same as before. Sure, she was brilliantly innocent and naive, childish even, but it lacked something that the shinobi couldn't put a finger on. Then something happened. A new, stronger life force appeared suddenly and drew all the archangel's attention. This is when the real Gabriel spoke in a whisper. This is when we first sensed you. Naruto looked to the archangel, that was still gripping his hand gently but with an intense force that was both warm and soothing, which made the thought of pulling away feel like an absurdity. Gabriel, though, continued to watch the scene play out, her free right hand clenched over her heart with tears in her eyes as she spoke. I was confused, nervous and scared of this power, but also. She took a slight breath before finishing, hopeful. Naruto looked back at the scene as the archangels on the 7th level gathered around a viewing portal and were scanning the entirety of the world before locking in on the comparatively small island. They zoomed in and continued zoning in on this power that was both familiar and alien to them. Gabriel continued softly. We did not know what to make of it. Some were dismissive, saying that the system must be broken. Others saw you as a threat, worth nothing but a swift death to maintain the integrity of our father's domain. The rest willing to withhold judgment until we understood what it was we were dealing with. Naruto then asked, "Then, what was your stance?" Gabriel watched as her memory self remained silent during the discussions before them. Though she did eventually speak up when the phantom her gathered a small force and departed to rescue the humans standing against the devils. The real her looked to him and smiled, filled with the gentleness she was born with, gripping him firmer as she replied. Just like now, I hope that you will help guide us. You are not my father reborn, like I had hoped at first. Naruto raised a brow at that assumption but did not comment on it. Gabriel continued unprompted. You are not perfect like him. You are flawed, scarred, and wonderfully human. Looking into his eyes, she smiled again. But maybe that is what my father had always wanted us to become. Wonderfully human. You are so wonderfully human with a soul so pure, so hopeful it is sometimes easy to not see you as one of us. Naruto frowned, stating, I don't think I could survive under those conditions in heaven. She giggled, a truly heavenly sound, shaking her head. Gabriel replied with a bigger smile, stating, I suppose not. My brother is doing his best to manage things, but it is not easy. He's overlooked a few things and had to be stern about others. Naruto snorted, griping. Putting it lightly, Gabriel nodded sadly, and now the sage was internally kicking himself at the level of this woman's kicked puppy look. He felt like an evil tyrant right now. Gabriel, though, continued. But, I am still hopeful that you can bring all of Father's children together again in a new way. A way that even Father hadn't been able to do. Or maybe, he hadn't considered it. Naruto thought on it, his mind supplying the sixth path pact. Gabriel nodded and smiled, cheering. Yes, exactly, all of us under the single banner again. It sounds like a dream and going to be great and everything. The childishness of this woman shining through once again and alleviating the sense of guilt the sage had about his earlier comment. Man, this is exhausting. Abruptly it all stopped and something akin to a plea came across the woman's face, as she looked up at him with a world-shaking puppy eye jutsu. A level Naruto had no idea existed until now, with an amount of innocence that he doubted even the old cranky fox could resist after being awoken from his many naps. Gabriel asks softly, but, I also have a request. Swallowing thickly, Naruto asks, which is what? In a very small voice, adding to the effect, and now this sage was sure if she had asked him to level half the world, he would do it without hesitation to save this innocent soul. How truly deviously innocent of this angel. Gabriel asks slowly. If it is possible, I do not want to trouble you, but if you could, please come and take a look at the system. Our numbers are lowered daily and it is what Father used to create us. Maybe you can help us adjust it. Naruto was about to respond instinctively, but thankfully his life experience within the last few years overrode his long-thought buried hero complex, restraining it fiercely and dragging it out of the pre-verbal driver's seat. That was close. The sage had to be careful about the promises he made since his exile from his home, having learnt the hard way what damage he could take from making such bold statements of intent and pairing it with his own nindo. Too many close calls, near-death experience, and heartbreaking moments to be anything but skeptical of anything and everything. Taking a moment to ponder this, and unwilling to outright deny the request, Naruto finally replied to the innocently awaiting Archangel, I will consider it. He nodded hesitantly at that, wondering what the others might say, and Gabriel beamed brightly, her halo nearly blinding the sage due to her happiness. She was so happy. Her hands left his and the two were back in the garden again. Kyoto Mountain Shrine, the beacon of green chakra fizzled out, a spark of holy magic forcing both Naruto and Gabriel stumble back from one another, clutching their heads in their disorientation. The two hunters and Kuroka rushed to stabilize the sage while Benamune catches Gabriel. After setting the sage down on the grass, Kuroka turned on the Archangel and hissed. What the hell was that? Gabriel was just as disheveled, helped to a seat nearby by the 10-winged fallen and only responded after sitting down. I am not sure. She looked at the panting sage, who looked a little worse than she and was hoping that he still remembered what felt like a dream to her, but something told her it was more than just that. Within Naruto's mind, the panic and anger was at a fever pitch. Naruto's mindscape Kurama growled deep and hard, snarling out. What did that thing do to you? Shukaku hissed. I'll kill him. I swear I will kill him. Matabi was just hissing non-stop, Kakuo was coated in steam, and Son Goku was just simmering in silent rage along with Isobu, who was so still, one might confuse him for a rock. Naruto, who was resting on one of his fox friend's tails, looked more than a little pale and was wondering the same thing. Saiken and Matabi were at his side in an instant, transforming into their human forms, looking him over whilst trying to determine what had happened as they too had lost contact with his consciousness. Naruto eventually muttered. I am kinda. He paused trying to put things in order within his mind, but it was still rather hazy but clearing up slightly and not in order. Though, for some reason, none of his companions could review the memories. To them, there was nothing there to read yet he could, and he had only disappeared for a few moments. This clued the sage in slightly, having remembered the only other time this happened was when his parents had appeared and took his consciousness to another part of his mind. This was just far more intense than then, thus he guessed. I think, somehow, that Archangel brought me to her soulscape. He was no longer so pale, and color was coming back to him. The other beings were surprised by that, unsure what to make of it, but Kurama looked even more angered by that and roared. "She what?" Naruto nodded, letting out a deep sigh before continuing. "Remember when I met my parents' fragments? It feels like that, just far more intense than those times. So, I think, I was brought to her soulscape." Kurama snarled at the news as it unfortunately made sense. He couldn't see or hear anything when those two appeared and took their son away from his eyes. Looking at his host, he growled. "What happened in there?" Naruto, who had calmed down a bit more, the feeling of dizziness falling away slowly, answered calmly. "I think, I saw the history of the pure angels. Their decline throughout the ages. The reaction to the death of their creator. Then. It took a lot of effort to recall this final piece, his face scrunching up as his hands held his head in effort, but eventually he breathed out a whisper. They want my help to save their race, dwindling numbers, empty throne." Matabi at his side growled, asking, "Not another promise, these wenches?" Naruto looked to her confused for several moments but eventually shook his head after realizing how that sounded. "No, not like that." He paused, confused at his own statement. This disjoint between his actions and mind was weird, but continued without thinking on it. "I did not promise anything. They have rules that prevent that and everything. I think it has something to do with me visiting their realm. I am not sure though." This was very confusing for everyone but did somewhat pacify them all in various amounts. Though, it was clear that Kurama was not pleased by this development. He will have to weigh the pros and cons thoroughly. Maybe, this might help with the yang control. On that thought, maybe the angel's antithesis could help with the yin control. This was getting complicated and the Kyuubi needed more information. A lot of what was going on went over Ddrake's head, and so he just let them all contemplate things before asking. "Naruto, when can I go check out those sea dragons?" Blinking for a moment, recalling that request from last night, Naruto nodded at the dragon and stood back up, aided by both Saiken and Matabi in their human forms before replying. "Right, I did say that you could. Be careful out there, okay?" Ddrake in the past would have scoffed at that. He was an emperor-class dragon. None could stand against him, but he and Albion both had been brought down by the combined forces of the biblical faction. His time with the Bijuu and Sage was also rather humbling, hearing the various stories of their own experiences against humans. So the towering dragon just nodded, Ddrake replying, "I will, my friend." Naruto nodded, before returning to the outside world once more. Kyoto Mountain Shrine. Naruto shook off the cobwebs and looked around to see everyone's focus split between him and the Archangel. The last of the dizziness slowly dissipated as he stood, helped by both Felix and Jenny, and drew eyes of everyone as he stumbled slightly. After getting his feet beneath him, Naruto offered thanks to the two hunters before looking to Gabriel and saying, "I am fine now. Do not worry yourself." The golden-haired woman just nodded. Gabriel was relieved by that, but Kuroka turned back towards her master, approaching the sage as she asked, "What happened exactly, Nya?" Naruto offered his now common gesture of a shrug that lacked confirmation or denial of prior actions and knowledge about the asked question, before verbalizing, "No idea, your guess is as good as mine." Kuroka looked annoyed at that for some reason, and her senses were telling her that he wasn't lying, but she also knew this guy was a shinobi, trained to lie and deceive from a young age. She couldn't trust her senses when dealing with him. Though, Naruto eventually just strolled past her into an empty portion of the garden, his back to the others as he went through the summoning hand signs slowly to ensure he poured enough chakra and dragon magic into it. This technique was slightly different from the normal summoning. No sacrifice of blood was needed, but yin, yang replaced it, and as he slammed his hand on the floor, the script expanded out from it and was infinitely more complicated. Holding his hand on the ground, Naruto focused on balancing the energies being called forth. Yin and yang came together easily enough, but as the amount climbed it kept slipping out of balance. Finally reaching just beneath his limit, he slowly and delicately pulled in the dragon's magic, which disturbed the equilibrium something fierce. Growling at this, Naruto flashed into his six-path sage mode, which stabilized things easily enough and even managed to balance the magic and aura of Daedric. Holding it there as the dragon adapted to this form and the soul corridor formed then solidified, Naruto whispered softly. Yin. Yang release. Dragon clone creation. In a swirl of chakra smoke and green dragon energy, Daedric appeared in a newer, stronger, and firmer form than last time, and visually, you could tell. He still towered over most, standing 6'6" with tanned skin, thick and wavy red hair that fell down to his waist, and eyes so green, they redefined the term. Still he wore his open biker jacket and t-shirt, cargos leading into combat boots and gloves. What has changed, however, were the numerous visible red scales on his cheek, in a similar way to that of Naruto's whisker marks, arms and back that lead into a thick tail extending from the base of his spine. Returning to his feet, Naruto and his companion met eye to eye with the dragon smirking as said dragon announced, "Not bad." Daedric looks over his form, seeing his clawed fingers, scaled arms and tail, his tail but clearly scaled down proportional to this form. Swaying it side to side, to get a feel of its size and heft, he looks back to Naruto, who smirked back as he powered down whilst saying, "This is the best I can do at the moment." He shrugged casually as the red dragon nodded, so the sage continued, "I won't be able to train until we leave here, so take care." Daedric nodded seriously, replying, "I will, don't worry about it." Waving him off, but the dragon knew he only had about 30% of his former strength in this form. Perhaps in a few weeks he'll be up to 40 or maybe even 50. If he gets to 50, then he'll try a full-on dragon transformation, but for now this will do. Naruto nodded back, gesturing to the sea in the distance. "Get going and good luck." With that said, Daedric's wings appeared from his back and he shot off in the direction of said sea without looking back. As Naruto watched the red streak vanish over the horizon, the others present looked to the sage in confusion and bewilderment and came to a troubling conclusion that the Red Dragon Emperor was now his familiar. A terrifying moment of realization for all. Beside Kuroka, who had seen the truth within the memories of his life as an exile, and time on the run. Something blocked her from seeing more, and she suspected it was the other Kyuubi, the one within the sage, who stopped her inadvertent invasion of his host's memories. Coming to terms with these memories is taking her some time. She had one hell of a nightmare last night and did not get much sleep as she again, inadvertently, recalled his earlier fights against his former allies in his place. Kuroka had felt the pleas in his request to leave him alone, the frustration at his hand being forced, and the pain of the loss each time he cut down a former ally. The guilt that stained his soul was like the blood that stained his weapons. Her morbid thoughts were broken by the sage turning back and stretching out, mumbling, "Guess I should meditate or something. Perhaps a shower or..." His grumbling of lack of things to do now that he wasn't constantly looking over his shoulders, was broken when a blonde missile launched at him and, on reflex, he caught and swirled around once before plopping the young Kyuubi on his back. Naruto asking, with a slight smile, "Kuno, what's up?" Kuno pouted, saying, "That other you vanished. I couldn't find it anywhere." Reviewing his memories, it hit Naruto that whatever happened between him and the angel earlier had disrupted his clone and dispelled it, seeing as he had the memories of playing with the kid on his back. Nodding at that, he looked back at her with an apologetic smile and asked, "Sorry about that, Kuno-chan. I am free now, so how about it? Another round?" Her eyes lit up with a nod, hopping off quickly and slapping his leg, claiming, "You're it." Then giggling as she ran off, causing Naruto to chuckle softly, shaking his head in amusement. Then he heard her shout, "You'll never catch me, slowpoke." The whole garden saw Naruto's whole posture stiffen, eyes harden, and his still visible cattails sway dangerously as he replied lowly but hollowly, "Slowpoke, huh? I'll show you slowpoke, data bio." The next moment he was just gone. No smoke, no wind, or anything indicating he had moved. He was just gone. Everyone blinked at that for several moments, before the squeal of a young child snapped their attention to the other side of the shrine where the sage was tickling the young Kyuubi, squealing for her dear life. She was pinned down, being tickled ruthlessly, and desperately trying to get away, but the sage was clearly superior in every way. Though her giggling and squealing, Kuno managed to wheeze out, "Mercy, mercy." Naruto cackled like a maniac, throwing his head back as he does so, overly dramatizing the act as he bellowed, "You who started this now wish for mercy, how fickle of you." He dove in and, with reflexes she did not know she had, Kuno managed to push herself out from under Mr. Sage and bolt towards the priestess's quarters. Naruto growled playfully, bellowing again, "Now you run, you shall not escape justice." Giving chase at a far tamer speed, earning a squeal from the kid who redoubled her escape efforts. While this was going on, the other guests were in a mixture of shock and awe, with a few smiles at the adorable scene. It was clear that the sage's weakness was children, and his true personality was surfacing slowly in thanks to the young kitsune. Kyoto Main Shrine. Ever since her return to her seat of power, Yasaka had been dealing with the buildup of tasks that had piled upon her desk in her absence. Sure, her council had put in the effort to minimize her own workload, but still there were things they were strictly prohibited from doing in her earlier reforms. Even more so since the reinstatement of the Eastern Yukai faction within the framework of the Western that she had controlled before. There are still growing pains, disagreements across the board, however the need for survival beneath the sage has halted anything potentially serious from happening. She would give Nurarihyun credit where it's due, he knows how to keep the peace. Though, maybe it's Retsuza and Magari's efforts. She'll think on it later, right now she had these reports to review. Think of the man and he shall appear. Well, in text form, as Yasaka finds a note from the old crone asking for an audience with the sage in a rather backhanded way. It was clear to the vixen that his patience had waned somewhat from her earlier promised words during their rather hostile and forced integration. She may be a maiden of the shrine, but hostile takeovers comes with the territory of a leader. Give it few days. No doubt Lord Sage is a bit on edge with such a drastic change of lifestyle. Better yet, she should tell the old-timer personally after she clears her current desk full. Underworld. Gremory Estate. Sirzex sits in the lounge of his childhood home opposite his mother, father, and wife Grafia, who was glaring death at him right now at his absolutely ludicrous idea. Why in the name of Satan would they put their son into such close proximity of a known hater of devilkind? Sighing again for nth time, Sirzex presses again. I know it sounds rather ludicrous, even Serafal and I agree on that point. However, after the report I received before coming here from Rias and Akano, separately, I am confident that we need to put this into play. But Grafia was unamused, even by her standards, and voiced her displeasure. I will not allow Milicus anywhere near him. With his parents nodding, Sirzex sighed hard and nodded. Okay. Then, can you please go yourself then? Grafia nodded stiffly, formally. Very well. I shall check on Lady Rias. Nodding, Sirzex smiles softly, replying, Thank you. Takamagahara. The knock on her door paused Amateurasu's work on her paperwork, glancing up to see Hachiman in the doorway, and he asked, Lady Amaterasu, we have the Greek god of travelers is here with a message for you. The dark-haired goddess of the sun sighed, already sick of those damn Westerners coming over into her domain so damn often and giving her so much grief each time. Recollecting her posture, she straightened up and nodded, then claimed, Let him in. Hachiman nodded and retreated back behind the door. A few minutes go by before the familiar blonde-haired Greek knocked and entered, though Hachiman could be seen just behind him. After approaching the desk, Hermes offered a formal, polite bow to the leader of the Shinto pantheon before announcing, Greetings, Lady Amaterasu, Lady of the Sun, leader of the... Amaterasu cared not for his bravado, cutting off the god of messengers briskly. Save it, Greek god of thieves. Tell me why you are here. Hermes nodded frantically, not interested in getting his balls melted off by the death glare of his brother's eastern counterpart, if rumors are to be believed. Thus spoke quickly. We wish to be a part of the developing 6-path pact. That you are forming. What can we do about joining said pact? The Ravenet nodded, suspecting that they would come seeing as they had the pair of hunters a part of the sage's guard. Now then, seeing as they want into her territory and further access to the sage. Hermes continued to fidget under the stern, unflinching, flickering red flaming eyes of the head of this pantheon. Eventually, Amaterasu spoke firmly. What does Zeus want to offer for his pantheon's admittance into this pact? I may not be the leader of the forming alliance, however I am aware of his preposition enough to know what he is ready to accept. Kyoto Mountain Shrine that evening, Rias sighs hard as she sits beside her queen, watching her peerage train in the garden, but she whispered, "We haven't made any progress with him, huh?" Akeno looks to her, a tight smile upon her face as she replied, "No, we haven't. I knew he doesn't consider us friends, not even cordial but with our deal." She trailed off and her king nodded, frowning lightly as her aqua-green eyes flow from Kiba and Issei's sword spar over to the tree on the far side where Menma was sitting across from the stray cat Kuroka. The two were meditation or something. Kuno was trying to mimic them as Kaneko was staring at them both and trying to figure stuff out. Rias muttered, "My thoughts too. I want to show that we aren't the what people think of us. We may be devils but we are more than that." The fallen, devil hybrid nodded, knowing this but this entire time Menma has been keeping them at arm's length and avoiding them. It was subtle at first, but ever since the reveal of the chakra paper and his denial of training Kaneko, he has been busy either playing with the young kitsune, or meditating with Kuroka. Akeno then voiced her thoughts. "What are we going to do?" Before Rias could answer, the heiress watches Kateria Leviathan approach the three meditating persons casually and calmly. She whispered, "That does not look good." The Thunder Priestess simply inclined her head, recognizing the situation developing. As the Satan-level devil approached the training duo, and playing kitsune, the nature energy they had been using saturated the air like a warm breeze but began to fade away. The chakra was vibrant with life but with an undertone of fire, like that of a campfire, though it fell off as the underworld resident sat down and got comfortable. Naruto's golden-orange slit eyes parted slowly, allowing the others to witness them flowing back to cerulean blue as they lock on to the purple eyes of the older woman and he asks, "Can I help you, Kateria-san?" The woman nodded, adjusting her glasses as she glances from the narrowed-eyed Nekosho to the sage. Kateria speaks up. "I was just thinking we could speak and get some things out in the open. As I said before, I have a specific goal in mind and getting your help seems the most appropriate way to achieve it." Naruto nodded, recalling that thus remained silent as she continued. "Therefore, as I have heard that you operate using deals and contracts, I wish to make one and know what I can do to repay you for service." As the sage thought on that, not really having anything come to mind, his self-appointed apprentice decided to interject in his place with narrowed eyes, Kuroka speaking up. "Why is a devil of the old faction willingly offering to work with a being outside your race exactly? Last time I checked, you all were rather adamant about world conquest and extermination of us yokai, fallen, and angels alike." Naruto looked to his apprentice, brows arched, before snapping back to the Lady Devil who went blank-face at the statement. Before he could ask further questions, Sariel did. "It is most peculiar and an interesting development, even for me." The Angel of Death had stepped out from behind the tree, though her silverish hair was now as dark as midnight, her battle garments replaced with fine robes fit for a noble and her scythe had been replaced by a rapier on her hip. She continued, after offering a courtesy to the sage. "Although, personally, this change of priority is most welcome. Assuming it to be implemented by your kin fully. I cannot speak for my other original houses." Kateria admitted unashamedly as lying was likely useless here among the powerful beings before her. She was under no illusions that of those in the small assembly, the only ones she could beat is the child of the Uchiei leader and maybe the cat, with great effort and cost on her end. The sage's strength is immeasurable and the Angel of Death has earned that title unlike her and her kin. Adjusting her glasses again, a nervous tick Naruto noted, Kateria explained herself. "To not embarrass myself, I will be honest with you all. A nod from the sage, Nekosho, and the archangel before she proceeded. Unlike the other original houses, mine is on the brink of ruin. It is true that I loathe the other factions, nor do I care much for human life and suffering. Within the sealed space all the Bijuu raised whatever brows they had, tails still, and were very clearly surprised by this open admission, though so was their host who at least respected her honesty. The Leviathan house member did not stop. However, I am far from stupid. If I die then my house does too. What good are dreams of grandeur for your house when there is no one there to benefit or carry on your will? How can we reclaim our house's name from those Satans who use it as a mere title, when we have died out and none lived to challenge the claim? Naruto's eyes narrowed at that, bringing up memories of the leaf using his own clan symbol as their own despite erasing them from their history books. His tensing up was noted by both Kuno and Kuroka, though neither knew why. Kateria continued, staring dead in Naruto's eyes. Sage Menma. In truth, I was dispatched to that battleground originally to aid your enemies. Now Kuroka tensed up, as Sariel's eyes narrowed and hardened. Kuno drew closer to Naruto's chest, having been seated in his lap since the devil approached, and allowed his arms to cuddle her as he was paying attention to the lady. Naruto nodded, still not sensing hostile intent directed at him or the girl in arm and knowing full well that Kurama was already standing and ready to shred the bitch if she dared threaten the kit. Kateria took note of, but seemed unbothered by, the subtle signs of aggression from the two other ladies and the fact that the sage's first instinct was protection of the young kitsune. She spoke up, knowing she was on thin ice. But, like many, I had been following the rumors surrounding you closely due to the suspected nature of your abilities. I was intrigued by the prospect of life being an ability. All the reports my faction managed to acquire regarding you only increased both my and the faction's interest in you. Naruto finally speaks, noting another group to keep watch for. Why is that, exactly? His voice and tone was neutral, not giving anything away at the moment, and the old faction devil nodded, expecting that line of inquiry, so Kateria supplied. For the faction, your subjugation would allow for the growth of trees and expand the fertility of our land with unlimited resource generation from your service to it. Naruto and Kateria both then looked to the angered Kuroka, who hissed, "You are trying to enslave him." Nodding, Kateria states plainly, "That was the original idea put forward by Euclid Lucifuge to Rizivum Levon Lucifer, yes. However, as our intelligence groups reported back to us the very few encounters and the sage's reaction to his brief, and forced, drafting into the Gremory house, it was decided that attempting to do so was unwise." Looking back at the man in question, who hadn't even flinched at the fact that others were planning to shackle him, Kateria continued, "They have yet to come up with a plan to approach you on favorable terms to them, but wanted to gauge your strength and discover any weaknesses you may have had. Thus, our arrival at the battle to assist the rabble." Kuroka groaned lowly, tail swishing dangerously at her back. "You expect us to believe that you are not in league with them still?" Kateria smirked at the little cat, before locking eyes back on the only man present, and says, "I am sure they know I am here, working my own angle, and will likely leave me be until the situation benefits them to intervene." Naruto shrugged so fluidly, Kuno, in his lap, did not notice, before replying, "Most slime balls do. Not my first time dealing with those types. Doubt it will be the last." Nodding, the lone devil added, "As for my own desire, I have already explained it to you. However, there is a health issue in the form of a rare disease among my kin that requires extensive medical knowledge or..." It all clicked for Naruto now as to why he specifically was on this devil's radar and why she is staying put. This person she wants him to find is likely suffering from something, and she wants him to find, then fix whatever is wrong with them. An A rank or maybe S rank depending on where the target is. Out of sheer curiosity, Naruto asks, "I understand it now. I wonder though what you are offering as payment?" Everyone in the garden was surprised at the way he simply accepted everything. Kuroka was less so, as she had seen memories from his exile where he would help any random person he came across. Though, after some time it fell off as Alliance shinobi began using the duress of others to lure him in, and he would have to abandon one of his core beliefs to save the lives of himself and those that needed help. Kateria was about to speak, but Naruto cut her off, raised hand and stern gaze. Not yourself. You said it yourself. You do not care for humans like me. Thus, what will you offer me to aid you? Nodding, the purple-eyed woman replied. 2 things off the top of my head, and I hope they are of use to you. Seeing him nod, Kateria informs the sage of her offer. Firstly, my house's loyalty. You will not be our leader, that will remain being me. However, if you ever need help or safe harbor, you will be protected on my lands. It wasn't a bad offer, Naruto mused. A new safe harbor is always useful, and it could be a base of operations within the underworld. A place he will likely have to go to at some point or another, for whatever reason, so it would be useful. Not seeing the sage outright reject it, Kateria finished with the other thing she would offer. Secondly, training. Naruto arched a brow, asking blankly, training. The ultimate class devil nodded simply, before holding up a palm, and a dark magic appeared. Naruto and all his tenants could sense darkness emanating from it, but it was Kurama who figured it out. That seems similar to yin release. Kateria's small demonstration fell off, and she looked to the sage, and as she suspected, his eyes were calculated, sharp and intelligent. This human is most definitely worth her time and attention, to study at least. Naruto inclined his head, still contemplative as he spoke. Could be useful. I'll think on it. Adjusting her glasses again, this time with a slight hint of a smile as another thought came to mind, and Kateria was secretly excited about discovering what other secrets she may find within the power of the sage. Rias looks to Akeno, who looks back, and both nod, agreeing that this development was not in their favor. The king whispered to the queen. We have to report this to the Saiyans. Said woman nodded, keeping an eye on the growing situation on the far side of the garden, but kept it discreet. Akeno whispered back, saying, yes, it may be wise to do. That night, beneath the stars once more, Naruto sat in the tree above the awaiting Kuroka, who was glittering and nervous about the coming conversation. Everyone was back in their rooms, or they were supposed to be, but the sage could sense that most were hanging around. But the target they were waiting for was approaching. Her peerage was at her back, at a distance, and was clearly hesitant about this herself. Naruto remained out of sight and sensory perception, a simple affair for a shinobi of his caliber. Surely enough, the form of one Kaneko Taju formed from the darkness and appeared before her rogue sister. When the two were face to face, Kuroka broke the growing silence. Hey there, Sharon, Nya. Kaneko frowned minutely. Naruto senses her anger flared high, yet she did not show it, but answered anyway. You called me here, One-sama. What do you want? Voice was surprisingly void of emotion and intent, despite the sage sensing the truth. Taking a deep breath, knowing her sensei above, Kuroka bowed to her little sister, which surprised her, and began earnestly. I am sorry, Sharon, Nya. The choice I made was rushed, and I had no time to think when everything happened. Kaneko was stiff, unsure what to make of this, but Kuroka continued. That bastard of the Nibirius house. He wanted. I could not let him harm you. He wanted to experiment on you. To try and take chakra and senjutsu. He was trying. The Gremory peerage were surprised, none more than the ones directly involved, with Rias making a mental note to speak with her brother to investigate the Nibirius house whilst listening into the stray cat. Because of that, I struck out and killed him. He may have been a high class, but against my senjutsu, he was worthless. Kuroka sniffled and was trembling, yet was surprised when thick muscular arms wrapped around her body and the warmth of a familiar chakra that gave her strength. Naruto's whisper followed. You can do this, Kuroka. Move forward. Nodding softly, the woman did so. I wanted to take you with me, I really did, but a life on the run would have put you in more danger. I didn't have time. So I made the choice after being spotted by the queen and ran. I hoped that they would focus on me, and not you." Kaniko's hair covered her eyes as she muttered. "They put me on the execution block. They were afraid of me. Said that I would go crazy like you. That dying for them was the right course of action. They cheered for it." Kuroka knew all this, but Naruto did not. His low growl was telling for the black cat, who couldn't look back and see his glowing scarlet-slit eyes. His tenants were equally furious, even Ichiei, with slashing tails aplenty. Kaniko continued. "I was a child. I knew nothing but you leaving me, abandoned by you, my only family." Kuroka was teary-eyed but did not back down. Her master, self-assigned he may be, but he was with her. She spoke. "I am sorry. I know it doesn't make things right. It doesn't fix the trauma of being left alone to fend against the whole world. But, you knowing the truth is the least I can do." Stepping clear of Naruto, though her two tails wrap around his arm as she bowed, Kuroka continued as she dropped down and bowed with her head on the floor, stating, "You may never forgive me, Sharon, but please know that I will always love you. You are my little sister and I promise to always help you with anything you ask." China somewhere, Cao Cao had finally made it back to his secret headquarters with his surviving team members. The fortified village had thick walls that were manned with the finest defenders of mankind, who had heeded the call to arms and did so proudly. Passing the thick, armored, magically reinforced gate, he is met with his troops saluting his return, and he nodded with a stony expression. It did not take long, however, for the murmurs to break out, as only the 5 of the command squad had returned from the battle, and even they looked beaten. The only conclusion was that the fight was lost. A full wipeout. Reaching the massive building, by comparison of the surrounding single-story barracks, armories, and training guilds, that acted as the headquarters, Cao Cao came face to face with one of the tallest men around. The well-built, broad-shouldered man stood at a clear 2 meters high, and his gray hair reached down to the aforementioned shoulders. This man had a frown upon his face, glancing behind the recently returned and the lack of troops trailing after them, and stated rather bluntly, "You failed." Cao Cao kept his face blank, instead replying, "What do you want, Heracles?" The reincarnation of the legendary demigod, often called by his Roman name in place of his Greek, just raised a brow and replied honestly, "I told you that keeping me here to babysit these weaklings was a waste. You need to realize that my power is unmatched, skill unreachable, and that a battle of that magnitude needed me to be a part of." Cao Cao waved him off, stating equally as bluntly, "That was only the introductions between us. You are our trump card. Next time we meet, you will lead the charge, and the fight will be the most defining moment for all of mankind to witness." Walking past the stubborn man as he spoke, returning to his room, and missed the cocky grin on Heracles' face. Through. The gray-haired man looked back at Georg, who looked more than a little uncomfortable under the gaze. Heracles, arms still crossed, lifted a brow and asked, "Georg, seeing as you went too, why did you not just teleport everyone back?" Georg, like Cao Cao, did not answer as he passed him by. Not liking being ignored, Heracles went to grab him but was stopped by Perseus, who grabbed his outstretched hand, drawing eyes on him as he spoke. "Leave it. He has enough on his plate right now." Heracles looked unconvinced, stating, "Oh, is that right, Pei? What could have happened that?" Perseus cut him off, annoyed at the name. "Just ask yourself the question you asked him. Think of the most ludicrous answer and you might get it." Before walking off himself, he wanted to shower and get some food before hitting the sack. Training is a must now, after seeing how stupidly outmatched they were. That was no fight, that was a massacre. Heracles thought on those words and, for once, moved off without any protests. Instead, he wanted to see if there was anyone he could fight against. They were just weak and caught off guard, most likely. None could stand against heroes like them. Jean just watched this all quietly, not saying anything as she was overlooked once more, but figured she should just get some food, shower and get ready to train more. Her speed is inadequate for the fights ahead and she must rectify that problem for next time. They were all unaware that they had been followed and the location documented, numbers recorded by one Oniros, on orders of his creator. He would begin gathering more information from those here and determine the threat, if any, this human faction was to his lady's plans. Kyoto Main Shrine. Yasaka sat at her desk, filled with paperwork, facing down two of her recent additions to her subordinates Nurarihyun and Magari, an elder Nekomata with 7 tails and graying fur. After a moment of silence, the kitsune states, "Tomorrow afternoon I plan on returning to the mountain shrine where our guests are currently staying, and I want you both to accompany me." Both were surprised, Nurarihyun especially, as he thought that this vixen would string him along as long as possible to keep the Kano Yukai in line. Maybe he had misjudged his Western counterpart. Magari, however, spoke up. "This sage. What is he like?" Yasaka thought on that question for a moment, fiddling with her pen while her eyes lose focus. After a minute or so, she finally speaks up. "Reserved and standoffish. He isn't argumentative or rude, but he is thoughtful but also quick to act." Locking her eyes on the two guests of her office, the kitsune states, "He treats all equally until you give him a reason not to. He is highly intelligent, observant, and sensitive. I suspect his senses are as sharp, or sharper than mine, so he will miss nothing." Both elder Yukai nodded to that, making a mental note to themselves about this human's possible ties to them, as no human could possibly have such abilities. Yasaka briskly added, "I suspect that he can disconcert truth from lies, but I am unsure at the moment to what degree. If you attempt to hide things from him, he will be quick to lose faith in your goodwill, and any trust he has in your word will crumble away." She smirked knowingly. "Not that you will know how he thinks of you. It will be subtle, but if you pay attention, you may notice his shifts in posture. That is the only indication of his opinion of you." Nurarihyun inclined his gourd-shaped head, rubbing his chin as he thought on those words. The 7-tailed cat at his side, however, again, was the first to speak. "If his senses are as you say, then is he one of us? A Yukai?" Yasaka shook her head, stating firmly, "He is human." She paused, recalling the smell she had gotten from him the morning of her departure back here, and her face became pensive. This was naturally called out by the elder Nekomata, Magari, asking, "You do not seem so sure." Golden eyes looked down on that cat, and hesitantly Yasaka spoke. "I am sure he is human, however, on occasion I do pick up a few extra scents from him. The two prominent, alongside his own, are Kitsune and Nekomata." Again, this caused both elders to stiffen, the cat's tails frozen in place, but before Magari could ask, Yasaka spoke again. "The Kitsune is not of anyone I have met or known. Though, when I say Nekomata, it isn't exactly Nekomata. It is similar but also different. Distinct, but the closest I could equate it to is Nekomata." The only feline in the room asked swiftly, "Nekosho perhaps?" Nurarihyun nodded, stating, "Yes, we knew a Nekosho who." Yasaka shook her head, still clearly distracted, as she quipped, "Both Nekosho sisters are there already, and he did not smell like either." Now that was a surprise for the old-timers, not expecting to meet with the two daughters of their old ally so soon. Yasaka's voice drew them back to the room. "Either way, we will head out after the council lets out mid-morning. If we make good time, we will get there before they sit for lunch." Both old-timers nod and were allowed to leave with more questions than answers. This sage is most certainly growing interesting, and meeting him will be a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity. After all, the path to sagehood had been lost to time long ago, and those that remained had vanished from the ancient texts, not being seen in many, many centuries. One of the supernatural's most accepted consensus was that sages were all but extinct. Legends of the warring eras that acted as the planet's enforcers, acting as its will and executioners. Yasaka was halfway through the final 2 stacks of papers when there was a knock on her door, and in poked Hitomi, a vixen of 6 tails with pristine white hair and fur with a faint tan. Her beady black eyes had a strange intensity to them, but was offset by her cute nose and seductive body as she spoke. "Lady Yasaka, a devil is here to see you." A raised golden, nobly clipped brow asked the unspoken, and the 6 tails elaborated. "Lady Graphia Lucifuge, Queen of Satan Lucifer. A glance at the clock told Yasaka that it was indeed rather late for anything other than an emergency meeting, so she nodded and signaled her to be let in. A few moments later, the maid appeared in her ultimate class devil glory and bowing perfectly according to the rules of formalities. Not wasting time, Yasaka spoke bluntly, as this is unusual for a meeting. Lady Graphia, what brings you here this late? Has your faction decided to withdraw from the meeting? Graphia shook her head softly, replying dutifully. On the contrary, it seems that the council has been rather outspoken on their inclusion in these talks. No, I am here to request admittance to your guest quarters. I have been asked to attend to Lady Rias and her peerage until the meeting time. Despite maintaining a diplomatically blank face at the outspoken comment in regard to the Devil Council, Yasaka was not fooled into thinking that this maid's presence was likely a stopgap measure of the new faction to keep the old faction devils from getting ahead in talks with the Sage. Lord Sage will likely not like this, but it is best to go along as to not cause any problems or trouble for the next week. After that though? A mental predatorial grin at the thought of the Sage leading the Yukai against these things and cutting down their so-called Satans. Externally, Yasaka nodded, replying in a tone that gave nothing away. I see. A reasonable request that I can grant. However, please keep in mind, due to the circumstances surrounding the Sage at the moment, there are members of opposing factions in attendance. I have strictly forbidden blood to be split and combat magic from being used. Graphia had expected that it was required and thus had no issues, replying promptly. I understand, Lady Yasaka. Yasaka nodded, before continuing. Light sparring is only allowed within the main garden, which is beside the food hall, and the main building is off limits due to it being considered celestial ground of Shinto. It is off limits to all but the Sage and his guard. Again, that was common sense and logical. Graphia mused internally as she was under no illusions about what would happen if a devil, even one as strong as her, were to cross into the celestial sphere of influence of an opposing pantheon. Thus, her response was predictable. Prudent and understandable, Lady Yasaka. Yasaka nodded before so finishing. Beside that, the Sage is in charge of security and any squabbling he will deal with. It was considered the fairest system as he belongs to no faction present. Graphia narrowed her eyes internally, knowing that Menma has obviously demonstrated his leanings towards the Yukai faction after that encounter in the forest. Ultimately she made no comment about that and simply nodded. Yasaka had half assumed that the woman before her would say something to contradict her but pretended not to notice and proceeded on. However, I was only planning on going back tomorrow morning. There are others who also wish to go, so you will have to wait until then. Graphia bowed, replying swiftly. I see. Then, I shall find an inn nearby and await for your departure. Yasaka nodded before looking to the vixen standing by the door, and ordered. Hitomi will guide you to an affiliated hotel and acquire you a room. She will also retrieve you when we are about to depart for the mountain shrine, as she will be coming with us. Underworld Riser enters his family dining hall, his little sister and queen flanking him, to find his parents and brother Ruvel, the heir of the house, sitting at the long table. All three look up to see the new arrivals and Lord Phoenix ordered. Good, you are here. Ravel, step forward. Riser, you can go. Without protest, Ravel stepped forward but was blocked by her older brother and king of her peerage, Riser, asking. Father, I think I deserve to know what you intend to do with my bishop. Ever since Ruvel has returned, all you three are doing are holding closed-door talks, and now you want to take her. Not on my. Ruvel cut off his arrogant little brother, stating firmly, You overstep, little brother. This is a meeting regarding the future of House Phoenix. It does not concern you. Riser's flames flared slightly at the jab, but his father added, Ruvel is right, Riser. Your actions have caused enough. He paused for a moment, as his eyes fell on Eubeluna and her vibrant purple hair. A blink before he looked back to his son and asks, Riser, you have a full peerage, yes? Annoyed at the condescension in his father's tone, Riser just nodded once and his father continued. Are any of them Yukai? Another nod, and Lord Phoenix thought on it briefly before asking, clearly distracted, "Can they use any yokai abilities?" Arms folded as a sign of his growing irritation, Riser grunts out. "Not for lack of trying. They haven't been trained to and have no idea how. What does this have to do with?" Ruvel spoke over his little brother, speaking to his father. "I think it is rather unreasonable to suspect mere children could mimic the power of a sage, father. Even more so seeing as they are untrained." Lady Phoenix nodded her agreement, stating, "He has a point, my dear. Perhaps add training to the list of things to achieve." Lord Phoenix grunted as he looked between his wife and eldest son before landing on his only daughter, that had moved to his wife's side during the discussion, and nodded. "Yes. Well, whilst we are waiting for Satan Leviathan's go-ahead, you Ravel should prepare for our house's recent history." Ravel blinked at that in confusion. She thought she had already covered that, but her mother spoke next. "Perhaps, seeing as he is of life, medical advice and knowledge would help?" Ruvel replied with a nod, stating, "Most likely, yes. Covering as many bases as possible would make for less chances of mistakes." Lord Phoenix nodded before looking back to his daughter, who was incredibly nervous right now as her father informed her. "Starting in the morning, your lessons will be increased for the next 4 days. Upon completion, you will be sent as an emissary of our household to gain favor with the man known as Lord Sage, the former rook of the Gremory House and leader of the Six-Path Pact." As he spoke, Ravel's eyes widened further and further in disbelief and fear. She had only heard whispers. Most the young heirs had of this person who broke free of the Gremory House. A man so powerful that he supposedly went head-to-head with Lord Lucifer and Lady Leviathan long enough to be saved by the angels. She swallowed hard, before asking, "Father, is that?" Lord Phoenix nodded calmly, face softening. "I understand you are scared, Ravel. But I assure you that you will be safe. At the moment, only the Gremory House has one pleading their case to him. However, the reason I am tasking this to you, Ravel, is because you are young and lack a peerage." Upon her confused face, the Lord of the House continued, "We know he dislikes the whole evil peace system. Unlike the failed heiress, you, my daughter, do not have a peerage and so will be treated far better. Your earnest nature he will respect." Based off the words of Lady Leviathan. Feeling a bit better, Ravel nodded before bowing to her father, stating, "I will not fail you." Riser spoke up immediately, peeved beyond belief. "Father, you cannot be serious about this?" Lord Phoenix glared at his third son, causing his son to fall silent before he spoke in a forceful, calm manner. "This is not up for discussion." It was clear to all that Riser was not pleased at having to part with his bishop piece. Kyoto Mountain Shrine. Naruto's slit eyes scanned the room one last time, briefly landing on the two Nekosho in the bed, before pushing off the windowsill and heading to the door. As silent as the gentle breeze on a forgotten forest, heard by none as the door shut in his shadow. Strolling down the hallway whilst discussing what his senses were telling the sage, Matabi speaking up first. "Maybe they're friendly." Shukaku cackled like a maniac, claiming, "Since when do we have friends?" Son Goku grunted at that, arms folded as he leans against the main tree in the center of the clearing. "That is true. Beside the lizard, who else has that title?" Yuki breathed through his bull nostrils, steam flowing as he spoke. "That might be an issue though. We can't ignore these problems." Saiken nodded, adding, "We should be careful, but we are safe here." Naruto grunted like his oldest friend is known to do, the fox grinning at the familiar gesture, and looked to Matabi, suspecting she wanted to say something. He wasn't wrong as the flaming cat spoke. "Hopefully, we can expand our friend group with these 3 signals. I know you do not trust them, any of them, especially that." Naruto's snort was masked by Kurama's. The big fox was acting as his container's backrest for the moment. The fox spoke up lowly. "Leave it alone, Matabi." The two tails huffed, head up, but remained silent and allowed Kurama to continue. "Still, we should remain alert. Who knows who these people are?" Naruto nodded calmly, before returning back to the outside and coming face to face with the door to his room. He blinked at that. When was the last time he had a room again? Oh, right, his apartment. The last time he saw his generation's Ino Shika Cho. Underworld Sears X enters Ajuka's laboratory in his estate to find his friend running though reports on the various peerages and anything abnormalities within the system. The green-haired Satan was planning on challenging the backlog of problems that have plagued the system and needed a solid starting point. This would be on hold as soon as the red-headed Satan spoke. I have news you are not going to like. Letting out a wary breath, Ajuka placed down the report in hand and leaned forward on his seat with hands flat. Internally, Sears X flinched at the sight of his friend's face as it was clear that Ajuka likely hasn't slept or stopped since they got back from the skirmish a few days ago. He spoke softly. We got a report earlier from Rias Tan. The lime-haired Satan just nodded, but nothing more as he stared at his friend who continued. She has confirmed that Menma can, and has, remove evil pieces. Ajuka nodded again, remaining silent, which was a surprise to Sears X, but then again, he's been awake for at minimum 3 days, likely more, and was probably somewhat aware of this possibility. Menma had done it to himself once, so it isn't much of a stretch that he could do others. Sages are just that powerful after all. Forces of nature, all of them. Finally, Ajuka spoke airily. Whose pieces did he take out? Sears X responded promptly. Kuroka the stray. Did she return to full Nekosho? Nodding, Sears X replied. According to Akano, cross-checked by Kaneko, yes. What happened to the pieces? The redhead shook his head, replying. Unsure at the moment. Nodding, Ajuka continued whilst jotting stuff down. What piece did she have, again? Sears X replied. 2 bishops. 1 normal, 1 mutated. Looking up from his note-taking, Ajuka raised a brow and for a moment thought on it for a moment. Again, he nodded and said. I need them. If I can study them, I might be able to figure out how he did it and prevent it from happening again. Pausing for a moment, he began to scratch something on another fresh paper before continuing. Or even our own version of the process for any reason we may need to recover pieces from others. Sears X thought on it and maybe it would be useful in some way, somehow in the future, maybe. Though, they'll need to keep this hushed on the down low and out of even private records. He'll need to get a message to Rias or Grafia and ask either to find out what happened to the twin bishop pieces of the Nibirius family and recover them, discreetly if possible. Grafia should be able to handle this task, and so Sears X, knowing she was in Kyoto right now, sends a familiar to alert her to call him immediately when able. It did not even take 5 seconds for a white Gremory circle to appear on his hand and he opened up a voice call between them. Grafia. I have received word from Rias that the rogue rook, Menma, has recovered a pair of Nibirius bishops from the rogue bishop, Kuroka. After speaking with Ajuka, we have decided that these pieces are to be recovered. His voice lowered as he finished. If possible, as discreetly as possible. It would be ideal if you were not suspected of recovering them, however it is not mandatory. Their recovery is a priority, okay? There was no hesitation in the maid's response. Grafia reports. I understand, Lord Lucifer. I will see to it. Sears X nodded despite not being seen by her and he finishes. Good luck and be careful. The line fell silent after that and the super devil looks to his fellow Satan, who was reading and scribbling into another book, sweat dropping at how focused he was. Thus decided to leave, his parting words. As soon as Grafia returns, I will have her deliver the bishops to you directly, Ajuka. A grunt was the only response from the researcher, earning a chuckle from the leader of the new devil faction. Kyoto Mountain Shrine. Just after breakfast was finished, Sariel approached him and asked, Lord Sage, may I ask for a training session for my team? Naruto didn't see any reason to say no, so shrugged his now infamous shrug, replying, Sure, I don't mind. All of them or... The Angel of Death nodded firmly. Sariel stated, All of them, yes. My Xenovia, Jordan, and Irina especially seems interested in improving their skills. Again, as she glanced at her group of young exorcists who were awaiting patiently for his response, and he nods, looking over at them too. Naruto gave them look over, and it was clear that they were all experienced, but then what he had learned about their god, his death, and how they are currently holding up. He was impressed by their willpower. Gesturing to the garden, he called out to them all, "Let us take this to the garden." They all follow after him, though Kuroka and Kuno were directly after him, the latter taking up her position and clung to his hand. Kiba and Issei quickly followed too, wanting to see what was going to be a master class in swordsmanship, most likely. Reaching the garden again, Naruto finds that both Gabriel and Benjamin were relaxing together and chatting like busybodies at the far end, in the eternal sunshine of the temple. He idly suspects that a certain goddess ensures this fine weather at all times. Stopping halfway through the open grass area, Naruto looks down to the kid in hand and asks, "Say, Kuno, can you practice your meditation with Kuroka-san beneath the sakura trees over there for a bit?" Donning the dreaded kid-eyed technique with textbook precision, Kuno, for added effect, sniffled as she looked up and asked, "But, you said that you would teach me the wind stuff." Naruto knew full well he never said that, yet the rumors of this move's ability to rewrite history seemed to be true somehow, despite this making no sense. Thus he bobbed her nose and replied, "Only when you can meditate properly for 10 minutes, and I might show you something cool, okay?" Adding a heavy sniff for good measure, Kuno asked, You promise?" Kurama roared at Naruto, declaring, "You dare make her cry?" Wincing under the roar of his uncle figure, Naruto replied swiftly, "I promise." Immediately she beams up, and rushes off to start her meditation, earning a snicker from the Nekosho, Kuroka commenting, "You are such a pushover." Naruto gave the catgirl a razor-sharp side-eye that shut her up, and quickly departing herself. The last thing she wants is to piss off her teacher. She will not lose to that little flame of his. Sighing, the sage turned back to see all 8 exorcists in their battle gear and swords in sight. Well, the front-liners in the form of Jordan, Jason, Zenobia and Irina have their swords. Naruto guesses that the others are ranged fighters. Jordan was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, tall teen with wide shoulders and a calm demeanor. He was clearly the appointed leader of the team, and wielded a massive broadsword and western armor reminiscent of classic knights, but only on his right side and no helmet. Jason, a dark brown-haired teenager with black eyes and squarish face, but was the tallest of the group. Like Jordan, he wore knightly armor but looked stripped down to the barest minimal to maximize speed and agility. He had a small shield and sword combo. What confused Naruto though was that both Zenobia and Irina had skin-tight suits, like really skin-tight, and selective armor plates on their right shoulders and legs. Made no sense to him, as it seemed the leather armor was made to emphasize their womanly curves and not for protection in battle. Doesn't that contradict the words of their god or something? Naruto blinked at that. Oh right. He isn't around. Perhaps someone in their organization has a problem that really needs to be addressed and resolved. Maybe replaced, as they are not fit for purpose. Shrugging, it wasn't his problem as he finally pulled out a single 3-pronged kunai and asks, "So, you guys want to test your skills against me, huh? Why is that?" Jordan was about to speak, but Zenobia did, stepping forward with a massive 2-handed blue slab that was apparently a sword, saying, "You showed me, at least, that standing up against injustice requires strength, Lord Sage. I wish to know if I have the strength to keep fighting, even after everything." Naruto suspected that this had something to do with what that blonde dude said and how they all briefly lost all will to live. So, he just shrugged casually, replying, "Sure. How do you want to do this?" Jordan takes over here, speaking up. "We typically work in teams of 2, Lord Sage. Will that be acceptable for you?" Upon the sage's nod, Zenobia speaks up. "Captain, may Irina and I take first dibs to test the waters for you and Jason?" Jordan nodded, stepping back, and the 2 women step forward with their weapons readied and their plan set. Time to see where they measure up against the future of heaven. Naruto versus Xenovia and Irina clutching her blade tighter. Xenovia's gaze hardened before she charged forward. Irina moving swiftly and silently in her shadow, moving to cover the opening clash. Naruto notes they're at mid-genin. Maybe high genin speed-wise, though considering that oversized sword, could be considered not too bad. Xenovia leads with a heavy, powerful, and an overly telegraphed wide swing that Naruto frowned at before ducking beneath it swiftly. Almost as an afterthought, his kunai deflects the chain sword whip thing's attack that was likely designed to cover Xenovia's exposed side after her opening attack. Good teamwork but nothing to write home about. Naruto, who hadn't moved, leg swept the blue-haired girl who leaps back, as another bladed whip came in to cover her relocation. Again, it was deflected by the kunai, forced into the ground, and Naruto's gaze stared between the two of them, completely unfazed by their joint attacks. It seemed well rehearsed. The two trusted each other clearly, but that also made it predictable. Well, considering he's had to battle against coordinated squads of Anbu, Bolt, Gem, and Hunter Corps, so maybe his expectations are set a bit high. Watching them charge him again, Naruto frowned at the predictability of their movements as their intent is clear as daylight and by the log. Could they not just? Letting out a tight breath, he decided to end this as it was clear their hearts weren't really in it. Moving at speed that none could track, Naruto chalk slammed both girls into the ground so hard their weapons dropped where they were and a loud thud was heard. Both Irina and Xenovia were short-breathed, dazed, and lightly concussed as he stood back up. Everyone else took a moment to catch up to what just happened and saw the sage returning to collect his dropped kunai as he spoke. You are clearly not ready to wield those swords of yours with that kind of effort. Wheezing and coughing, Xenovia rolled over in an attempt to get up but was too weak to do so. Irina just curled up into a fetus position, trying desperately to get breath into her lungs. Naruto picked up his weapon before turning back to the stunned exorcists, who were now attempting to aid their fellows inside, shaking his head before offering. I know you have heard something that shattered your faiths. 6 of the 8 exorcists flinch at that, the 2 on the ground unable to write, then so Naruto continued anyway. I think you guys say, you're all father, or something. Well, yes, he died in defense of you all. I do not know the details of it all. I am not a religious type or anything, so I can't say anything about it really. He shrugged again, though his fellow teens all looked to him still. Naruto continued. But I do know what it is like to lose a family member. I only heard stories about my folks, but in letters I got from them both. He decided to edit the truth here. No need to tell them about the inner workings of souls or chakra, as that is need-to-know basis and he's giving them a lot already. Naruto stated clearly. My own father told me that it is a parent's duty to believe in their children explicitly. So, if you see your God as your father, then surely he too believed that you all would carry on his work, right? Even Gabriel was stunned at that, gawking at such a simple reality presented by the sage to them all. Did their Lord and Father really believe in them all, just as they do him? Naruto though shrugged again, adding, for me, knowing that my parents believed in me has gotten me through my darkest days. I may not have met them, known them, but I know they love me and will always be here. He jabs a thumb at his heart, his face serious as he states, always smiling with me, loving me, and most importantly being my son in the darkness of. Abruptly Naruto froze ramrod straight, head snapping to the northeast, with gaze so hard that diamonds would be considered Play-Doh. Everyone sensed the shift of his mood, the stiffening of his frame and power slowly rising that suggested a threat of some kind. Growling lowly, Naruto slipped his kunai back into its holster and out from his wrist seal came a katana that none present have ever seen before. It was a borderline odachi, scarlet metal with a black leather-wrapped handle and made for a simple look. Yet the moment this weapon appeared, everyone could feel the barely restrained power within it regardless of their own affiliation, and now everyone was concerned at what had the sage this worked up. Naruto jogged briskly towards the open space of the shrine and the others followed, either brave or stupid, it was too early to say, and saw 4 new arrivals talking before the bridge into the protected area. Yasaka, with Hitomi at her side, was explaining the rules of the shrine to Grafia, Nurarihyun and Magari, when suddenly Naruto appeared, and just as she was about to call out to him when her senses locked onto his blade. A blade she had not seen before. Paired with the sage's serious expression had her concerned. This is when the others all arrived and she asked them, "What is going on?" Kuroka replied swiftly, handing over Kuno to her mother. "We don't know. He just suddenly stopped, summoned that sword, and came over here." Yasaka nodded, taking hold of her daughter, and watched as Naruto stood ahead of them, looking left then right, as if looking for something, and was clearly on edge. Naruto was indeed looking for something. He had been tracking these two approaching since last night, and now that they were close, they had suddenly vanished, but he, nor his beasts, were fooled. His sixth and seventh senses were warning him about imminent danger. Senses honed by being on the run from the highest of trained assassins. In a world full of them, he trusts his senses, and thus, without his armor, has pulled on his strongest, most treasured weapon, and one he has absolute faith in. His mother's katana. This was something he was not risking, and as much as he wanted to go armor up, there wasn't enough time. All his beasts were up and ready for action, with Kurama stating, "We could go straight to 6 paths. Yuki replied to his elder brother, "Without knowing the extent of their strength in nature energy, it would be hasty." Saiken spoke next. "Your vitals are all green, Naru-kun. I also took the liberty of preparing your acid release and will control its output for you." Kakuo and Son Goku spoke together, same with lava, steam. Matabi chimed in next. "My flames are ready, Naru-kun. Just tell me when." Chomei offered. "In case they can fly, I too am ready." Naruto's internal representation responded with a nod to them all as they spoke, but turned to Kurama and said, "Give me Sage Mode for now. Hold of on 6 path until we know what we are dealing with. This feels like a shinobi battle and I do not intend to lose it." Kurama grunted as he took up a meditative pose. Outside, Naruto's senses spiked and the yokai all sensed his channeling of nature energy climb briefly before they stopped sensing him entirely, despite seeing him. He then crouched low, legs spread and gripping his weapon tightly as if about to quick draw. The tension was thick, none dared to breath, as they had never seen this side of the sage before, and the numerous yokai were using whatever senses they could to try and detect what the sage had. The devils and angels too, but all couldn't find anything. The next moment Naruto vanished again. Just vanished without a trace of him moving. For 10 seconds not even the wind blew. For 10 seconds, hearts were in throats, palms sweated, and breathing was considered optional. For 10 seconds all eyes were darting around the area for something, anything to happen. It was broken by the sound of steel clashing against steel and 2 crash landings, with one near the last torii gate, at the top of the platform from the stairs to the shrine, and the second ahead of the observation group, though it was more of a hard landing than a crashed one. Naruto slid to a stop a few meters ahead of the others, sword back in its saya but eyes locked on the rapidly dissipating dust cloud. His posture was tight but hadn't even moved a single muscle until the figure stood back up muttering, "Damn, fast." Naruto asked slowly, despite the distance between them, "You actually tried to sneak in here, you?" He paused upon the parting of the dust, revealing a fair-skinned man with spiky, blue-tinted black hair tied into a ponytail, though had bangs parted down the center causing them to frame his face. He donned a high-collared blue shirt, matching blue trousers, and a utility belt, a sword saya held within it, that securing them both together. But what caused Naruto's freeze, however, was a very familiar white and red fan on the upper red chest. His growl was nothing short of murderous as he spat a name he thought he'd never encounter again. Uchiha. Spat like a potent venom, spitting off to the side a small blob of acid that broke everyone else from their confusion and flinching at the level of malice the normally easygoing sage had spoken with. The man's onyx eyes lock onto the blonde who had struck him, recognizing the swirl he wore, and equally sneered his response. Uzumaki. Black flowing to red, 3 tomo spinning rapidly, earning a deathly snarl from the blonde as his own bloodline, never before seen in this world, made an appearance as 8 thick chains of solid chakra snake erupt out from his back, and his chakra pressure cracked the ground, forcing those nearby to their knees. Uzumaki versus Uchiha. Only the top-leveled people in attendance remained able to witness this battle of wills as the two men stared each other down. It took a few seconds before the newcomer growled. "So, you Senju lapdogs have come here too." Naruto growled feral back, cutting him off. "How dare you speak their name, traitor? You and your kin are nothing but betrayers, sacrificing all for the power of a primordial. I will not allow you to subjugate this world." The Uchiha looked even more annoyed at being called traitorous. As far as he recalled, before that final fight with that white-haired Senju, was that the Uzumaki had sided with the Senju. How can his clan be traitors if they never had an agreement? Then this nonsense of primordial power? The hell is going on? Yet he had to block the open slash from the Uzumaki, who was faster than even his fully matured Sharingan could track clearly. The follow-up nearly took off his head, losing a few strands of hair, and now he knew this Uzumaki was going to push him to his limit. Naruto pushed his offensive, slashing hard horizontally then back again, and forced this Uchiha back on principle or face bisection. Upon the Uchiha's leap to the opposite side, trying for a blind spot strike, Naruto's chains shot at him, forcing a withdrawal from there. An earth-gauging flaming slash was dispersed by the chains once more, but a trench was created in its wake as the Uzumaki, who decided to bring his mother's sword around, trailing acid, but the strike was defended against by a flaming sword. That did not save the ground being carved out at the Uchiha's back, causing the outer wall to crumble, and forced the fighters to leap back once more. Another crimson fire slash was met by its water counterpart, creating a high-pressure eruption of steam that caused the ground to tremble and forced the unprepared off their footing. Naruto then leapt from the torii gate and down on the now defensive stance Uchiha. His 8 chains shot forward and forced the Uchiha back again to escape implement, but they still acted in pulling the Uzumaki to ground faster, landing hard in the now crater from doing so. Naruto then leapt after his foe, and another clash of swords slicing effortlessly through one of the outbuildings, its corner falling off after they passed. The Uchiha summoned his dark crimson flames over his sword once more as he clashes with the now water-coated katana of Naruto. A sharp eruption of steam parted both parties, and Naruto lands on the vertical side of the cut-through house, his opponent on the outer wall, and the two sharing a gaze with one another. In unison, they both stabbed their blades into the surface they were standing and going through hand signs, gathering chakra. Naruto internally vocalized, "Water style, high pressure damage," blasting out a razor-fast stream of purified, condensed water that was met by a call of fire style, grand flame destroyer. The stream of almost fully clear hydrogen dioxide met the crimson stream of flames the destroyer, and the explosion blew apart half the outhouse and knocked all back, including the two responsible. Under the cover of the superheated steam created by the two attacks, Naruto pulls himself from the rubble of the outhouse, the living quarters of the priests and priestesses. He was coughing and wheezing, covered in cuts and a few burns, but nothing debilitating enough to prevent him from holding his mother's sword. He wasted not time dashing through the haze of water vapor. Before anyone else could get to their feet, the tremors and rings of steel greeted their ears. The overwhelming chakra pressure had let up, and more were getting to their feet with Yasaka barking orders to keep clear. This was clearly a fight in a league above them. Following the scent of the bastard past the walls of the shrine, Naruto was greeted by a barrage of fireballs that he either cut through or tore apart with his chains, before again landing in a clearing directly atop the Uchiha from before, sword to sword. The contact was brief but telling. The Uchiha forced back again, thus he pulled on his blood-given power as they spin to a familiar visage, at least to Naruto, who hissed at the sight. Mangekyo. Before the common eruption of steam blasted him clear, but the blonde controlled his landing and was quick to retake his offensive stance, growling as he did so. "I have seen that pattern too. Good. I can end you quicker." This caught the attention of the Uchiha, but he wasn't given much time to ponder as Naruto unleashed a stream of acidic water at him. Before the Uchiha could react, A boulder of bedrock shot up and parted the stream around him, keeping him safe. Clicking his teeth, Naruto detected the arrival of the second signature, which was now clearly siding with the traitor, thus his enemy now. No matter. They'll die too. Uchiha are too dangerous to let live. Abruptly, the rock shot forward at him, followed by two figures shooting out to the flanks. Shooting his chains forward, Naruto was slightly surprised by the density of the rock as he couldn't break it in time, thus he leapt up over and directly into the path of a fireball from his right, and another rock from the left. It was perfectly timed, the Uzumaki would admit without shame. Too bad he has seen such moves before. Retrieving a kunai in his left hand, Naruto channels lightning through it and throws it through the rock, shattering it, before slashing through the fireball on the right, the seals on his mother's sword absorbing the chakra constructing it. Despite the battering of loose pebbles and dirt, minor irritations as opposed to the boulder, the sound of a scream being muffled told the still airborne Naruto that his kunai struck true, and was swift to Hirshin to the marker it had. Appearing in a yellow flash, the Uchiha was swift in the defense of his partner, clashing against the opening swipe from the Uzumaki. Naruto notices the other person was a woman, about as tall as him and the Uchiha, thick in all the ways that matter, and with ears of some kind atop her head and a bun-like tail. She had a bow staff in her dangling left hand, her right covered in blood as she attempts to stem the bleeding in her left shoulder. The Uchiha growling drew the Uzumaki's attention as he said, "That move, I recognize it from that white-haired bastard of a Senju." This briefly confused Naruto. His Hirshin was based off his father's, optimized for distance and activation speed. His father's version was an overall refined version of the second Hokage's. His distracted state lasted only a few scant seconds but allowed the Uchiha and his companion to leap back, and cast another attack jutsu. Uchiha flames coating another solid rock. Seeing this, Son Goku snorted, which broke Naruto's spiriting thoughts, and the four tails declared, "Pathetic copy of our greatness. Show them, Naruto boy, what true lava can do." Chomei spoke up now, wary of their environment. "Do not be hasty. This forest is home to many diverse species." Naruto nodded to both before replying. "Just a brief demonstration. One attack, then I'll douse it and stick with water and acid afterwards. Deal?" Chomei nodded, and Naruto returned outward as he balls up his left fist, lava-style chakra building within it as he charged forward and punched clean through the flung rock. The now molten splinters were sent back to the senders. A bright red chakra construct erupted around the duo, absorbing the molten lava raining down upon them, but only became a beacon for their enemy to hone in on. Before the rib cage could expand out further, chains of chakra wrapped around it and kept it constricted in place. Next, Naruto appeared, sword sheathed, and a rotating ball chakra in hand as he called out, "Wind style, Rasengan." Clashing with the construct hard, cracking it further on impact, and slowly grinding away at it before the woman leapt forward and swung her staff. The chakra barrier shattered both ways and Naruto took a hit to the gut, winded him, though thankfully enough of it was taken by his mesh undershirt so he did not pass out. Sliding to a stop, the Yukai woman was on Naruto like an animal possessed, her staff slamming down with enough power to rip up and split the earth, forcing the Uzumaki to sidestep and then leap away as the ground rippled like water under her assault. She kept swinging, and Naruto kept out of range whilst deflecting ranged shots of crimson fire from the Uchiha. The terrain was being torn apart enough to warrant a map redraw. Naruto did not want to take another hit from those very dangerous strikes, his experience with. Swallowing hard, Naruto shifts his head slightly, causing a chunk of rock to graze his temple, drawing blood, thus forces him to make up his mind and asks internally, "Kakuo, gonna?" The dolphin horse snorts, cutting him off, "Already primed. Let her have it." Grinning, Naruto backflips elegantly further than he needed this time and landed opposite this Yukai, who spins her staff once as she took up stance. After a moment of silence, the two dart towards one another with Naruto speeding up at the last moment, right arm pouring off steam. The woman moved to block his punch with her staff and could only watch as her family heirloom caved in like paper under the strength of her opponent's fist. A fist that... Before she could finish that thought, her chest felt like it was caving in, ribs cracking under the pressure as she was punched clear of the trail of destruction she wrought in his pursuit by a healthy margin. The Uchiha cried out, "Aoi! Damn it!" But by the time he turned back to Naruto, however, the blonde already had appeared above him, his steaming scarlet sword coming down to slash. His eyes pulsed and the Uzumaki passed through him harmlessly, giving him a moment to breath. Naruto skidded as he twirled back, his attack failed, but as he does his opponent's blade was coming at him from his left, forcing him to block with his own. A kick from the created opening sent the blonde skidding twice before he righted himself and landed firmly. Looking up, the Uchiha was going for another fire technique, so Naruto, taking consideration of the local wildlife, went though his own and called out, "Steam release. High pressure damage." His stream of high-pressure water vapor clashed against the Uchiha's flame again, sufficiently dousing the area to prevent the chance of forest fire by the traitor's actions in this fight and even began pushing him back. What Naruto was not counting on was the willpower of the other combatant, the one he knocked into next week, and her appearing at his back, which forced him to cancel his technique early to engage hand-to-hand. The woman almost steam-rolled into him until he swirled around and deflected her into the tree he was standing beside. Taking her head-on with that monstrous strength was inadvisable for his continued health. Slightly dazed, she lashed out with a wide, backward-swinging haymaker. Her short claws scratched across her attacker's chest and forced him onto his back foot, literally. Her following jab was deflected. She narrowly avoided his returned jab, but his knee intercepted her left jab, deflecting it with perfect timing, beneath his extended arm. Bringing her overextended right arm back to elbow him in the face, it was caught, and she was pushed back by sheer strength against the tree she ran into, steam flowing off her opponent's arms in excess. Dazed again from her head slamming into the tree, she only briefly caught her companion's arrival, and now she was released, her legs shaky and losing strength. The fierceness of the close-quarters clash has never been seen before in this world. Jabs, cuts, kicks, knees, and elbows were blocked or deflected at such speed there were shockwaves of air. None of the outside observers could follow it, just the aftermath. It was broken by a failed Kamui and a solid roundhouse kick connecting and sent the Uchiha back, tumbling towards his partner, and stopping in a slide before collision. He wheezed and coughed from the blow. A few broken ribs, and yet he glared up at the approaching Uzumaki, who snarled at him. Kamui was difficult to deal with initially, however my counters have been battle-tested against it plenty of times since. Spitting blood, the Uchiha growled back as he staggered up to his feet. "You, Uzumaki, can go to hell." Naruto slowly draws his blade once more, its scarlet metal gleaming with malicious intent, as he snarls the whole way, replying, "You first." His blade rippled within a razor, vacuumed edge, as the blonde lifts it in preparation to strike. "Tell that nutjob Madara I sent you." The man's eyes widened at the name, but before he could ask, Naruto brought his sword only for both his wrists to be caught by another new arrival in the pale, yet soft hands were gentle but unyielding. An arrival who seemed to be too fast for even the blonde to track effectively, thus getting this jump on him. He blinked once at the long snow-white hair, pale skin and large, dark brown eyes peered back at him. A familiar face. No, a face he had seen before upon the bridge that started it all. Gave him his nindo. All Naruto's anger and rage evaporated instantly, recognizing this person, along with his breath and strength that caused his chakra to vanish from the blade that fell to the ground unceremoniously, blade tip first. Breathlessly, Naruto called the name that came to him at the sight of this familiar soft face. Haku. Yuki nodded, smiling brighter as he had recognized her as she had hoped, replying back. "It is you, right, Naruto-kun." Naruto stumbled back in shock and bewilderment in equal measure as his tears welled up. Though, after his brain finished its rebooting from the sudden blackout and began to out things together again, his shock faded back to anger. rage bubbling up to engulf his frame. This impossibility was an insult to the memory, thus finding him growling. It can't be. I watched you die, who the? Yet Haku, who was also just as emotional, just slipped forward, too fast for him to stop, and hugged him, hard, tightly with grace and whispered. Only when protecting your precious people, does one become truly strong. Do you remember me telling you that? With his breath caught in his throat, choking back sobs, Naruto nodded as he hugged his first true friend back with all the strength he could muster, sniffling as he spoke. I made it my Nindo, ya know. Enjoying the warmth of her first friend from way back when, Haku nodded as she ran her hand up then down the broad back of her fellow sage. She listened as he cried into her shoulder. I did it. I protected my precious people. I became strong for them but. Losing strength in his legs, things getting too much to bear, Naruto dragged the girl down as he fell to his knees, but Haku kept the embrace going as the blonde continued. They turned on me. My precious people. They turned and tried to kill me. Ba-chan made me promise to run, to not look back, and to live free, but they chased me. Naruto's grip on her kimono tightened, and Haku was trying very hard not to get too riled up herself at the fact that someone as kind and innocently naive as Naruto was back then, had been forced into such a no-win scenario. The blonde continued. I pleaded with them at first, but they only wanted my submission. I cried out for them to leave, but they tried to kill me over and over again. I had to. Haku shushed and rocked him against her body. The other two sages were silently listening on and were kind of bewildered by the sight of this Uzumaki breaking down in the arms of their fellow sage. This is when it hit them both, now that they were no longer blinded by rage or family protective instincts. This Uzumaki was the one they had come looking for. Naruto continued crying, saying, they all came for me. The cloud, stone, the sand, even the mist and my own home, the leaf. I fought them all back. Then they called in the others. Frost, star and even smoke. I fought them off for 3 years. Haku was now furious. How dare they? In the time it took to get here, she had realized that the dream she had was some kind of summoning back into a war of some kind back in the elemental nations. From what her returned self had uncovered, they were fighting against a unified shinobi army to defeat a group trying to destroy the world. Needing answers, Haku asks. But I thought the world was united behind you. What happened? Sniffling, Naruto looked up into the brown eyes filled with warmth and fear before he whispered. It was. We won. Sasuke and I managed to beat back Madara after casting his infinite Tsukuyomi on the world. Then, he turned into this primordial god and mother of chakra. When we beat her too, we all went home and they were scared I was too strong. That I would become a second Madara. Haku frowned, but urged him to continue. He did. Ba-chan warned me when the allied shinobi forces ambushed our training session. Anbu, Bolt, and Mist Hunters trying to subdue me to put me under enslaving seal. He chuckled, but it was hollow as Naruto explained. An Uzumaki enslaving seal. It was to force my complete submission. Haku was inadvertently dropping the temperature of the entire area, allowing the others to lock in on their location among the trees. She asked, then, how did you get here? It took a moment for Naruto to compose himself enough to speak again, eventually saying, Sasuke was trying to resummon the goddess by using the tailed beast's chakra and his Rinnegan after I kept beating him over and over again after my fleeing from the leaf. Haku growled lowly, muttering, Damn Uchiha. I should have killed him. Naruto shook his head, continuing. I arrived and took back all the chakra, and fought him again. This time I didn't hold back, I didn't pull my punches. His hold on her tightened, whispering, I saw him as a brother once. I really did, but he was trying to destroy the world, threaten my family and me too. I promised Ba-chan, so I had to kill him. Haku nodded. It was the right choice. Then what happened? Naruto responded after a moment. I tried to flash away, but his Kamui knocked my space-time technique off course, I think. Next thing I remember I was waking up in some school here. Haku nodded and cradled him tighter to her chest, as if to save him from his own pain, whispering back. I see. Then, it was good that I came and found you. You're safe now. I will protect you as to me. You are my most precious person, my first friend. Naruto nodded but remained silent. This is when the other two sages limp over, drawing Haku's eyes that were glacial upon noticing the Uchiha fan. The man raised his hands, the universal sign of surrender, and said, I mean no harm. I too have come here as a sage. Both Naruto and Haku raised brows at that, a blonde and white, and he decided to introduce himself as he knelt down with his friend hanging off his shoulder. My name is Izuna Uchiha, Phoenix Fire Sage. Izuna gestured with his head to the woman in his arm, informing them. This is Aoi Chika, a black bear earth sage yokai. Also, she's my wife. Haku's gaze flowed between them before replying. My name is Haku Momochi Yuki, sage of ice and a Yukiheim yokai. Naruto, despite being wary of this Izuna guy, offered. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, exiled shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, and Nidaime Sage of Sixth Paths. Though, none outside this circle know of my name and I want to keep it that way. Haku looked down at him with amused white brow raised. She wasn't alone as the other two looked interested too. Naruto shrugged carefully, not wanting to dislodge himself from Haku's lap he had fallen to, saying, What? They couldn't read elemental and when the devils tried to reincarnate me as one of theirs, they called me and I quote, Menma Maelstrom. Haku snorted like a lady, Izuna bit his bottom lip, and Aoi chuckled lightly but hissed when her broken ribs shifted uncomfortably. Seeing this, Naruto sighed. He guessed he should at least hear his fellow sages out and get answers to whatever the hell is going on here. Reluctantly, he sat up from his lap pillows and moved towards his former enemies. Noting their tensing, Naruto waved them off, saying, I am no medical ninja, but I know more than the basics. At that moment, he goes through hand signs, much to Haku's surprise, and his hand erupts in a heavy green and places it upon Aoi's ribs. After a few seconds he pulls back, still maintaining the technique as he orders. Lay her down flat. I can reset the bones but she'll still need to take it easy once I'm done. Not all that good at this as I haven't practiced in a while. Izuna nodded, and gently lowered his wife down and allowed the Uzumaki to work. Though, a brief chakra flare drew all four sages' attention to the southeast that caused Aoi to jerk up, hissing before calling out. The kids. The Uchiha was on his feet in an instant, wincing at his own injuries, before stating, I'll go get them. Haku stood too, stating, I can get us there sooner. Immediately opening up an ice mirror and ordering, let's go. She jumps in and Izuna follows, leaving Naruto to tend to Aoi's wounds. Nearby in a small campsite among the forested hills, 3 young black bear yokai, no older than 10, were being confronted by Yasaka, Kuroka, and Rias's peerage. The others had stayed behind to organize the cleanup of the battle damage, tend to the wounded, and find the missing. Yasaka was displeased to find 3 unknown, unattended young bears within the restricted area around her holiday home and their refusal to cooperate was testing her patience. Lord Sage is battling nearby and he may need help against this foe but she can't ignore these 3 either. Kuroka was as curious as any cat about the fact that these 3 all had traces of senjutsu training, a base level but it was there and clearly refined. Not only that, their chakra was much denser than anyone else besides Narians maybe. Their defensive postures of the oldest 2 showed training, despite their young age. Rias was insanely curious about these 3 and was trying to work out what exactly they were. Though, a small part of her mind was wondering if they could be beneficial for her peerage but she was ignoring that part as the last time she jumped into that, she lost her legs and nearly her life in retaliation. Just as Yasaka was about to ask again for their identities, a very cold mist and fog rolled in suddenly. The yokai all knew this was unnatural as it was laced with dense layer chakra when a voice called echoed out. You will not harm them. It was feminine and almost melodious but drew attention away from the huddling children that were soon engulfed by the same mist. Yasaka's eyes narrowed dangerously, growling. "Who are you? Show yourself." There is no answer for a long moment. The devils were tense and ready for an attack from any direction, but nothing came as the mist began to disperse again. The voice echoed again. "A friend of the sage." They all perked up, but Kuroka hissed, drawing attention to her as she spoke. "The kids are gone." All look at their location and Yasaka growled. "How disgraceful, such a basic tactic. We should push forward. The sage is nearby." She rushes off, her escort party following after. Forest battleground back with the sages. Naruto has been slowly repairing the broken ribs, having just mended the last one, and moving on to the bruised organs when an ice mirror opened at his back at 5 people hop out, revealing the 3 kids, Izuna and Haku. The kids call out in unison. "Mum! Mama!" Rushing to her side, but were stopped by their father, Izuna calling out. "Stop! Let our fellow sage work." The kids all looked to the blonde, who was sweating under the intensity of his focus, then down to his glowing hands over their mother's abdomen and stepped back. Haku then dropped on his left side, beside Aoi's head, and watched in amazement as that formerly lost boy, who was crying into her shoulder not too long ago, was focusing like a surgeon to save another. Truly, she had missed a lot. All was silent as Naruto tended to the wounded woman, allowing the wind to blow calmly through the battle-scarred forest and the hair of those gathered. It was a truly tranquil moment that lasted until the green glow faded and Naruto let out a heavy breath of relief. That level of control really takes it out of him. The 3 kids, 10, 8, and 5, were vibrating in their spots for the green light to move. That Naruto looked to them and nodded. With gave them just that, and they bolted to their mother, hugging her tightly. The Uzumaki found himself smiling at the sight. It was a familiar one to him too, as, despite his rather dark outlook and prospect on his life back in the elemental nations, there were scattered times where he had played the healer instead of destroyer. It was very few and far between, but it did happen on occasion. In the wakes of bandit attacks, busting out slaves and treating their ailments to aid in their escape, stumbling on a remote village without a doctor. Those times he understood why Ba-chan did what she did. The whole reason he had kept her medical books and training to heart, not just as mementos. That reminds him. The blonde looks to his now white-haired friend and asks, "Haku, you are still interested in healing, right?" Haku looked back, blinking owlishly in surprise to the question before thinking on the question offered and recalling that is what she did tell him back then, and nodded, saying, "I guess you could say that. I haven't really done much since I got here myself. Mainly just practicing my sage powers and getting back to my old skills." Surprisingly, Izuna spoke next, having overheard the answer. "Ah, that does take a bit of time. Took me nearly a decade to do so myself. Took some getting used to, this sage stuff." Naruto nodded to both, before looking back at the Yuki and saying, "When I was forced to." He paused, swallowing spit, then continued on. "I was in the middle of my medical training crash course from my Ba-chan. I have all her notes and training plans for me still. You can study them if you want." Haku nodded carefully, before asking, "Who is this Ba-chan of yours, exactly?" Naruto blinked owlishly at that, before realizing that he had met Tsunade after Haku's. Nodding, the blonde informed, "Oh, right. I haven't said. Her name was Tsunade Senju." Haku's eyes nearly jumped from her socket, obviously knowing the name of the most powerful kunoichi and leading medical expert of the elemental nations. This was truly one of the best things that could have happened from this cluster of tragic events, and she nodded repeatedly, saying, "I would be honored." Izuna, though, growled. "Senju." Naruto glared at the Uchiha, growling back, "Easy there, Uchiha. My Ba-chan was the last Senju, just like I was the last Uzumaki." He paused, correcting himself. "Well, technically speaking, there was another, but she's a filthy traitor who sold me out. Likely to try impress the last Uchiha that I killed before coming here." Izuna recoiled at the prospect of an Uzumaki being worthy of his clan name. Then again, he had long since changed his own opinion, but then again, the Senju and Uzumaki are basically the same thing. Any other clan he could tolerate, just not those two. Though, he also realizes that he'll have to get on with this one. Then something hit him, recalling something he said earlier, and asked, "Wait, earlier you said something about Madara Uchiha." Naruto fought back the snarl and bile at the name, taking a deep breath to calm himself before grinding out. What about the man who enslaved the world and nearly destroyed it in his twisted desire to bring about the end of war? Izuna recoiled hard at that, asking hesitantly, "He what?" Naruto nodded, explaining. He collected all the tailed beasts within an object called the Gedo statue. It was actually the husk of the original 10-tailed beast, drained of its chakra. He managed to manipulate a young kid of the Uchiha clan to carry out the plan, then resurrect him later to become its host. The adults all recoiled at that. Naruto just nodded and continued. Once he had its power, he casted an infinite Tsukuyomi upon the moon and used its glow to blanket the world in its effects. My team and I were the only ones spared due to my old teammates Sasunu. Izuna asked. This Sasuke guy, right? Naruto snarled at the name, but nodded, and the others knew not to mention the name again. The blonde continued. He was betrayed and was transformed into the rabbit princess and progenitor of all our chakra, the primordial rabbit goddess Kageyuya. He shuddered at the mention of the name, telling the others that she was no joke. That this was no joke. Naruto continued the brief. We managed to seal her away again with teamwork and the power of the Shodai Sage of 6 Paths, Hagoromo Otsutsuki. It was close, and after everything, Madara died again after that. Izuna sighed heavily, wincing at the pain from his ribs, but before Naruto could get up, they all looked to the east and sensed the rapid approaching of the yokai and devils. Haku whispered. That didn't take them long. Naruto frowned, replying. No, it did not. What should we do? Everyone looked to him at that, and he blinked back and asked, What? Izuna replied in a deadpan. You know them best, you should know. Naruto frowned, but it was true. After a moment, he replied. Well, seeing as they still don't know my name, I am forbidding its use. Haku asks. Then what shall we call you? Naruto shrugged, supplying. The devils call me Menma. He and all the former shinobi's lips twitch at that. Naruto continued. The cats call me Narian, don't ask. They all nod, so he moves along. And the yokai just call me Mr. or Lord Sage. Take your pick. Haku replied first. I like Narian. Then, I want to go by Ichiei. Wincing, Naruto counter-offered. Miyuki, seeing the look of a plea in his blue eyes, Haku nodded and confirmed. Miyuki. I can work with that. Izuna had been thinking on it himself. His family won't be a problem, his wife and kids use respectful titles. So offered. Natsu will work for me then. His wife of many, many years, always snorted, replying. Summer? Really, Anata? Izuna shrugged, replying. It's all I could think of. Sighing, she shakes her head, always supplied. Try Natsuo instead. It is often shortened to Nate, so could be easier for us to talk openly. Again, Izuna nodded simply, knowing better than to argue with his wife, and looks to the other two who nod back. Naruto confirming for everyone. So, you are Nate. He looks to Haku, confirming. You're Miyuki. Gang nods as Haku adds. And you are Narian. Everyone nodded just as Yusaka leads Kuroka around the bushes into the clearing where the sages were all gathered. The black cat called out loudly. Narian. You're okay. This worked just fine for Naruto and his fellows, as it gave them plausible deniability around his naming convention. As the two entered the clearing, the devils bring up the rear, which is also when the Kyuubi noticed the 3 kids from earlier and froze, but for different reasons. Yusaka was surprised that the children were here so quickly and clearly being comforted by one of these unknown alongside Lord Sage. For the devils, however, it was Bijuu's Menma, the ultimate force in their eyes. that stood against all the Satans on equal footing, looked worse than any time they have seen him before. Multiple wounds and bleeding with torn clothes with a general air of battle weariness about him. Before they could ask questions none wanted them to, Naruto spoke up. "You are too loud, Kuroka. How are things back at the shrine?" That successfully drew all eyes back to him and back on subject 2 with Yasaka growling at him. "What the hell was that exactly? You just went." Izuna raised a hand, stating, "Ah, that was my fault." Drawing eyes to him, and thinking on his feet, the Uchiha explained further. "As a sage, we have rules and I did not follow them, so he saw me as hostile. I lost my temper slightly and retaliated. Lost myself in the fighting." The other adults all nodded, Naruto adding seamlessly to the shinobi grade alibi. "Me too. After we clashed back there, decided to move us further out as it has been a long time since I got to really push myself that far. Got a bit too excited." He scratches the back of his neck as if embarrassed, earning sweat drops from the newcomers who also noticed how beaten up he was and now knew how powerful these sages were. Aoi, who had caught onto the alibi being weaved by the others, spoke next. "As I was nearby, I left my kids at the campsite and came to investigate why my husband was flinging around his fire all over the place." She glared at Izuna after speaking, for added effect, but his paling under it really sold it. Haku smoothly picked up where the bear Yukai left off. "Same from me. I was on my way to meet my idiot here." In a bold move, Haku openly hugged Naruto from behind, leaning her 5'4" slim frame that was donning supplely perky C-cups against his back, smiling warmly as she continued. "As he decided to leave me behind, and go exploring as I slept to stabilize my sagehood." Naruto chuckled nervously as she stared at him from the side in a look that told all that she was still waiting for an excuse, reasonable explanation or an apology. Everyone but one brought it. That level of familiarity was hard to fake, and she was absolutely beautiful with the blonde looking comfortable in that position. Kuroka, though, narrowed her eyes on this new woman. She knows she's lying. None of the memories she got from Naruto hold her, and yet for some reason he's acting like they've been friends forever. They must all be lying, but her own senses can clearly pick up the adult 4 are all nature energy users at a level above her own, meaning they all honest-to-goodness sages like Naruto is. She, like everyone else, thought they had died out. Yasaka, on the other hand, was very concerned about how close this new woman was with Lord Sage. Somehow, she knew him from before even the devils did. From what her senses were telling her, she was a Yuki Onna. Not just any Yuki Onna, but its rare variation of Yukiheim. Like the Nekomata and its superior variant the Nekosho, the Yukiheims have superior senjutsu ability with an instinctive use of ice, wind, and water. They were supposed to be a myth with only one confirmed centuries ago. This one here being the second. But then, why did she have to pick Lord Sage as her destined one? Well, Yasaka knew why she did. It was obvious, but still, couldn't she leave him for her? Rias was stunned at the news Kaneko just gave her. Just like those 3 young bears they stumbled across, these 3 others are sages too, and the one hugging Menma supposedly knew him before even they did. A genuine snow woman. A sage to boot too. Amazing. Back to those 3 bear kids. They're the offspring of 2 sages, which means they will likely become incredibly powerful in just a few years and likely follow in their parents' footsteps as sages. Oh, she'll have to make a good impression here, and maybe in a few years. A sudden scream broke through the thoughts of everyone, drawing eyes over to one Kiba Yuta clutching his bleeding right arm. A cut running up from his hand to his shoulder. He was standing beside Naruto's dropped sword, currently blade first in the dirt and humming lightly with wind chakra that still engulfed it. Asia was at his side in moments, though all 4 adult sages stared at the Devil Knight with cold, hardened gazes, with Naruto asking, "Yuta-san, what were you attempting to do with my sword?" His voice was monotone yet felt like a death sentence all the same. Rias and Akeno let out wary sighs. Issei chuckled nervously as he too was thinking about checking out that really cool-looking red sword himself. Kiba, though, offered a smile, or tried to, but his injuries made it look more like a grimace, as he replied. I was curious about it, Menma-san. It felt powerful but not holy or divine. I was seeing if it was maybe demonic. Izuna snorted, remembering full well that scarlet Uzu alloy has been the bane of elemental nations for decades, and stated, that thing is no demonic blade, despite their numerous names. No, that thing is pure Uzu steel alloy and bane to the existence of many. He cut his eye at the blonde sage, who was grinning like a fool and stuck his tongue out at him. The Uchiha asks, what did you name that one, huh? Naruto chuckled as he informed, that one is called Benihime. It wasn't forged for me specifically but rather my mother. I inherited it from her. Haku hug tightened briefly, her silent support that caused him to smile softly and nod, patting her arms that were loosely across his chest, before rubbing them as he looks to the sword. Izuna nodded, claiming, sounds about right. Honestly, those damn things are overpowered. Aoi brought them back on subject, asking, that doesn't change the fact that you tried to take it, Devil-san. It is a sage's weapon and not yours. Why would you approach it, knowing it was not yours to touch? All four sages looked back at the recovering teen, Asia's gear running on over time to finish closing up the large wound. Kiba bowed his head, offering, sorry, I was just. Naruto finally stood back up, Haku allowing him, and approached the sword whilst glaring at the knight, who swallowed hard. That is no excuse, Yuto-san. He takes hold of the handle, pulling it free of the forest floor and swinging it around once more to clear the dirt from it with a pulse of wind chakra before sheathing it back into its saya smoothly. Try that again, and I will show you exactly what it can do to a man. Am I clear? The younger blonde just nodded, not saying anything more. That weapon is truly something else, way beyond anything he could ever possibly hope to conjure from his sword birth. Even when sheathed, he can feel the power barely being held back as Menma strolled back to the group. Naruto arrives before Haku, who smiled dutifully calmly and asks her, no more black hair then? Haku takes up some of her long white hair, that trailed down both front and back in her old style with a pure white band in place of her old headband. Pondering on that for a moment, she looked back at the blonde before asking innocently, is white not my color? Naruto just shrugged non-committedly, replying, just curious, doesn't matter to me. Abruptly, said hair flows from tip to scalp back to its former dark black glory, and she looks back at him with a smirk. Better? Naruto sensed the release of her accumulated nature energy required for the feat. Haku's senjutsu levels dropped to barely registering now, and again he shrugs, claiming, both suit you. Deciding to set the tone for their relationship for the others, Haku tilted her head cutely to the side, finger resting on her lip before replying. Oh, but back in that meadow, then later on the bridge you said. She trailed off and Naruto narrowed his eyes on her, earning a giggle as she could just barely make out the faintest tinting of pink on his cheeks. The blonde whispered, but everyone heard. I was 12, Miyuki. Do not start with me. Haku offered him a familiar shrug as she twirled away from him, chiming, old enough to kill. Naruto facepalmed, muttering beneath a breath when Izuna chimed in, adding, she's right, you know. I first saw combat when I was like 7. Reaching 12 was a luxury. Naruto, knowing this already from history, waved him off, stating, yeah old man, don't remind us. Izuna growled, eyes flashing dangerously, you wanna go? Naruto glared right back at him, growling, anytime you want to get your butt kicked. Haku grabbed Naruto by his ear, Aoi doing the same to Izuna, with both ladies stating, enough you two. Both male sages grumbled as they felt their ears burn under the woman's tugging, the children giggling at the sight of both men being brought to heel. Yasaka wasn't really sure how to handle this. 3 more sages. Somehow all knowing her sage and were clearly all close. Sighing, she says, we should get back to the shrine, now that we know Lord Sage is safe. Also, the few wounded should have been tended to by now and we need to start the repairs. Aoi glared at her husband, who pointed to Naruto, stating, "It was him." Naruto looked genuinely offended at the statement, glaring back. "Says the pyromaniac who was flinging around slices of fire like a blind civilian hitting a piñata." Izuna was unwilling to give in, stating, "Like your high-pressure water streams were any better. You cut that building's corner off clean." Naruto swallowed hard upon catching Haku's smile in the corner of his vision, Yasaka's raised brow and Kuroka's look of confusion. So he quipped back, "You carved up the ground and almost killed the civilians had I not intervened." Aoi's eyes narrowed and Izuna was sweating bullets now, but the smug look on the Uzumaki cannot stand. Fortunately for the Uchiha, the Uzumaki's high smug levels had reached a point that the Yuki felt it needed adjusting and yanked on his ear, getting a yelp from said Uzumaki as Haku spoke. "Oh, is something the matter, Narian?" Naruto saw her smile and whimpered slightly, shaking his head, and she nodded before pointing the way the devils came from. "I think we should get moving, yes?" Kyoto Mountain Shrine. As Yasaka led the group back to the shrine, the sages walked together with the young kids loosely kept between them. The vixen had noticed immediately how close Naruto was staying to that Yuki Onaheim, and her sticking to him in return. She wasn't the only one to notice this. Kuroka had been a few steps behind the two and glaring at the slightly taller woman with barely contained jealousy as she was able to touch the sage's arm without him flinching or stiffening, like he does with everyone else. Narian looked almost relaxed with this newcomer. The devils were bringing up the rear again. Rias was hovering ahead of them all as Akeno spoke to Kiba about his actions and the danger he put himself and the rest of them in. By the time the party reached the top gate, everything had already been repaired and Lady Amaterasu was standing in the center of the bridge, arms crossed. Yasaka was surprised by her arrival. She hadn't said anything about visiting beforehand, but then again, she's the leader of the Shinto pantheon, so she can do what she wants. Despite the buildings being fully repaired, the trench of a sword slash remained behind, and now Aoi glared at Izuna, recognizing his handiwork anywhere, and so stamped her foot at the end of said trench, her chakra to flow through the earth and sealing it up, good as new. This got a surprised look from the yokai present, but also, naturally drew the goddess of the sun's eye too, and the slow dawning of comprehension was amusing to the group of sages as Amaterasu asks, Lord Sage, are these? Naruto speaks up, assuming he was being spoken to in this instance. Yes, Lady Amaterasu. These are my fellow sages. We have just met back up and went a little overboard in our greetings. The deity nodded, looking from one face to the next, briefly pausing on the three kids, which got her four tensing sages, and as much as she would like to pretend the action did not worry her, it did. The six-path sage alone would be troubling to put down, backed up by more of these sages, and she doubts even she would get out in one piece. Finally, the leader of the Shinto pantheon nodded with all the dignity of her station as head of the big three. Amaterasu thus moved on to why she had come here, informing, "Well, in that case I shall leave it to you. The reason for my abrupt, and unannounced, visit is due to a slight delay to the conference." Naruto raised a brow at that, asking, "Delay? I agreed to a week before I would get underway again." Amaterasu inclined her head again, stating, "I am aware of that, which is why I have come personally to ask for your understanding in this affair. It would seem that many of my own, as well as abroad, wish to take part in this groundbreaking project. Thus, it will take a little longer." Naruto grunted, unsatisfied by this big deal. All that is going to happen is everyone asking him for crap and pleading to his hero complex for aid. Probably throw in a few politically sensitive marriage trying to tie him to them. Yada yada yada. Haku cleared her throat, drawing his eyes briefly, and she nods, so he sighs hard and looks back at the goddess and nodded, stating, "Fine. I'll wait." Amaterasu glanced briefly at Yasaka's stone face, which told the sun deity everything she needed about this new sage's impact already. Looking back at Blonde Sage, she continued, "Thank you, Lord Sage. As a bonus, we shall allow your guests to stay in the main shrine with you. Also, the teleportation will be allowed beyond the confines of the walls. Yasaka nodded, confirming she understood, and the other leaders present were glad too. So Amaterasu looked back to the sages and smiled warmly. As for you all, warriors of the planet, I welcome you all warmly to our domain and hope you feel safe here. You are safe here. The new sages nodded once stiffly, the kids remained silent, and the sun goddess simply vanished again into the beam of light back to the celestial realm. Naruto turned to his fellow sages and stated, "We should get you settled in for now. We have nothing but time." So the other three nodded, then the second oldest, Tajima Uchiha, asked his new uncle figure. Uncle. What about us? We are hungry too." Naruto smirked, stating, "Relax, Taji. Once we put your things away, I am sure dinner will be ready, right?" He offered that last question to Yasaka, who nodded with a smile, replying, "Yes. We will prepare something at once." The cheers of the kids caught smiles upon the adults who heard, and Yasaka led them all across the bridge and to chambers within the main shrine. This it for today, guys. This was the part 9 of What If Naruto Was the Jinchuuriki of 9 Bijuu X High School DXD. Stay tuned for more.